Thank you, Jim. Has this audio working back there? Okay, good. So just to put that bio in perspective, the only reason I'm here is because somebody else canceled at the last minute. So let's not get carried away with being too important. Normally, I always like, and by the way, we have one of the best professional speakers on the planet in the front row here tonight, Robert Tucker, who I co-wrote a book with a number of years ago, and who gets paid a lot of money for doing what I do for free all these years, so figure he's the smarter one of the two of us. And I said, now, when I'm done, Robert, you've got to give me a grade. Like, how did I do on your schedule or scale? And so we'll find out tomorrow how I did, or maybe later tonight. Thank you for coming, Robert. Robert's an expert in innovation. Normally, I always like to start with a joke. That's sort of like a default thing you do in the speaker's world. And tonight's not a good night for it. I was at UCLA through every riot in the 60s. And I've been watching the riots on campus this last week. And apparently, UCLA particularly has been ignited recently. And it's with a very heavy heart that I watch that. It's with a very heavy heart that I see some of the tendencies of humans to hurt each other, humans to bomb each other, humans to shoot, kill, say terrible things to each other. And it seems like starting with a joke isn't as appropriate as starting with, why are we here? What do we come for? And so tonight's talk is about 360-degree consciousness. And I think that's a better place to start. Because, as you'll see by the time we get to the end of it, I hope, that the nature of consciousness is such that it's not an ephemeral idea somewhere out there in the ethers that has no grounding in reality, which is for philosophers and scholars. It actually is a path of life. In fact, it's a path of life, and if you read the little flyer, which can deliver results on the economic, the social, and the spiritual level. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. So I will get to the benefit. I call those the benefits. So the wins come next. But first, let's start with what is 360 degrees consciousness? What does that mean even? And I want to share with you that my mother, like many people who were born in the early 1900s, as a woman, was not particularly formally educated well. But she was a font of what I call peasant wisdom. Peasant wisdom is when you just know things because you're practical and you've lived them and you've heard your mother or your grandfather pass them down to you. And one of her observations, and she had many that I find constantly, I quote, was, there are none so blind as those who will not see. Think about that. There are none so blind as those who will not see. And what she was referring to is not the fact that people would walk around bumping into chairs intentionally. She's not talking about people who were keeping their eyes closed because they wanted to have a life that was blinded. What she was referring to was people who could not see because they couldn't get past their own obstructions, their own visual filters. And so for those who don't have their eyes closed, bumping into chairs, what is it she's talking about? Well, she's talking about a thing called myopia. Okay? Myopia is an interesting word. So, and that's a word she would never have used, because that's not part of what someone who was not that formally educated would have come up with back in the early 1900s or mid-1900s. And there's two characteristics, if you look in the dictionary about myopia. One is called a vision limitation, and that's very much what we're going to talk about tonight, vision limitation. So myopia can be a limitation of vision. The second one, though, is, I want to quote this, a lack of imagination, foresight, or intellectual insight. And we're going to talk about that too. So both definitions of myopia apply to tonight's conversation. What we want to do is we want to relate to that first definition of myopia, which are the filters that we have that we come to every observation with. Think about it. We come to every observation. Immanuel Kant said that we are the sum and circumstance of everything that's ever happened to us. That's who we are. So the question then becomes, if we have these filters, how are they impairing us from actually seeing what is there to be seen, as opposed to that which it is we would project that we would like to see. And so those are blinders. And even great peripheral vision, if you think about it. So let's say you've got filters, but you have enormous peripheral vision, right? You can really see the side. Most people don't have great peripheral vision. But let's say you have great peripheral vision. That's at most 180 degrees. I can't see back here if I have peripheral vision. I can only see to here. So what would it look like if I could see 360 degrees? What would that look like? All of a sudden, it looks like a whole nother level of how one observes one's reality and the questions that we face every day, whether they're political questions, social questions, or in the world we live in today, increasingly environmental questions. The second part of that definition of myopia is the more tragic limitation. It's what keeps us from seeing what might be. So think of that second definition. It is the lack of imagination, foresight, or intellectual insight that keeps us from seeing what might be as opposed to what is. So we're living in a world right now where people are seeing what will likely be, not even what might be, let alone what can be. 360-degree consciousness is about changing that dynamic, changing that perspective, not just from a philosophical point of view, which is important, not just from a academic or scholarly point of view, but from the point of view of how it affects us every day of our lives without us realizing it. So we're here to go beyond 180 degrees. We're here to go to 360. And I want to start with a definition, since we're talking 360 degrees of consciousness. Let's start with a definition of consciousness. And it's interesting because I started looking up that definition just as a way to get myself tuned up tonight. And here I came up with 3 different dictionary definitions, usually stacked together. Here's the first one. Consciousness is the state of being awake and aware of one's surroundings. Interesting. Yeah, I kind of get that. You're conscious, you're aware of your surroundings. That's kind of good. Okay, I'll start there. The second level, though, is more interesting. It's the fact of awareness by the mind of itself and the world. Now we're talking about your perspective of you in relationship to everything that's other. The third one's my favorite, though. The third one is consciousness is the quality or state of being aware of one's surroundings, especially of something within oneself. Especially of something within oneself. That's the best definition of consciousness. And if you think about it, consciousness is not biological. I mean, if you look up in different textbooks, they'll tell you it's the cerebral cortex and all this silliness. But clearly, it's not a mechanical answer. My dear friend Deepak used to say that if you start thinking, you close your eyes and you observe yourself, observing that you are doing that, who's the person observing the observer? That's consciousness. Okay? So it's not something you could ever find on a brain scan. You can't find it metabolically. It's something that is beyond the way that our electrons and our synapses fire in our brain to something bigger than that. Consciousness is about how we connect, some would say with the divine, at a minimum I would say, with all that is, particularly if it's the something, in quotes, within oneself. So that consciousness is the one we're discussing tonight. That's the one we're talking about tonight. That level of consciousness. And if you were to start applying that level of consciousness to a full 360-degree spectrum of one's life, it can't be boxed off or centered in parts of the day like, I'm going to be a really bad boss but a nice dad. So when I go home, I'll be a decent human being. Or more likely the opposite, I'm going to be a really good person at work and a real bad dad at night. You can't box it off. And here's my favorite one. You can't box it off like, I'm going to be a Christian on Sunday. Right? It's like, it doesn't work that way. It's like, if you check your religion at the church on Sunday, I'm not sure what religion you're in, but you're not really living that religion, whatever it is. You're not living that spiritual truth, whatever that truth is. So if you are going to be fully alive and conscious, it means you can't segregate it into parts of the day, and you can't segregate it into parts of your life, and more importantly, you can't segregate it to what's filtered and not filtered. It transcends that. Some people would say it's how we are uniquely human. So in the world we are now about to enter, where AI, and I have a background in AI, some of you know, in the world of generative AI, the fear is the machines will take over, and that's a real fear. And frankly, we need a lot more controls than we have. But at the end of the day, what makes us unique is not our ability to compute, to remember, to recall, or disseminate. We've got computers that have been doing that better than we have for the last 50, 60 years. That's not what makes us human. What makes us human is there's something about us that's connected to what some would call the divine, to some would call consciousness, to what some would call the wind, this is the Buddhist phrase, that blows through the world. So what we want to look at is we can't have any partial views. You can't have an opening with 180 degrees if the answer's behind you. So you need 360 degrees. And no good guy at home or bad guy at the office is going to be able to find a way to bridge the inconsistency between what is conscious in front of them and what might be conscious if they could only see what was behind them or around them. So the nature of consciousness requires developing another skill. And why call that the third-party observer? And increasingly, I think there's more literature on this now. The third-party observer is like this. Let's say you have got a seat, front row center on the best play on Broadway. Okay? The best play on Broadway. And somehow you got the front row center seat. And you are watching all the characters on the stage. And there's one character that looks just like you, has your name. It turns out it is you. But you're seeing that character from third-party perspective. Now notice, when you see from that front row center seat, you can actually see 360 degrees around that character. The character can't, theoretically, but you can, because you've now gone to third-party observer. It's the third party observing the character that gives the character that true vision. And the playwright, if they do their job right, will surprise you with what emerges from the back of the character versus what's directly in front of them. Otherwise, it's not a good play. So how do we experience that 360-degree vision? Well, spinning around like a Sufi is not going to get you there. That'll get you dizzy. Well, unless you're a Sufi, in which case it'll make you happy. But it's spinning around to try and find what's behind you is not going to give you the ability to discern how consciousness can be applied, how that 360-degree consciousness can actually change your life, which, remember, is why we're here tonight, right? How can it change your life? Not why is this a theoretically interesting topic? And that front row center seat is what gives you the ability to see what it is that you would like to know if you could see it from all 360 degrees. Let me give you some examples. In the little flyer we sent out, we said that if you develop 360-degree consciousness, you will prosper economically. So I want to define prosper for a minute, and I want to make it clear. Prosper does not mean that you made more money. It could, but it usually doesn't. Prosper means that you succeeded at your goals. And for some people, a goal doesn't necessarily mean being a billionaire, I would hope for most. It means something else. And so prospering, to me, means doing well at what it is you're seeking to bring into your life when you drop your filters and you can see all 360 degrees. That's prosper. Or as we say in Italian, abbondanza. That's abundance. So let me give you a quick definition that I think is, a quick little quote that I think is really delightful. It's by Cahill Gibran. And what he said, if I can find it quickly, and I hope I can, is I'm going to have to paraphrase it if I can't find it. Give me 1 second. They deem me mad because I will not sell my days for gold. They deem me mad because I will not sell my days for gold. And I deem them mad because they think my days have a price. Cahill Gibran. So that's Prosper. He understood Prosper. I also want to share with you one of my favorite people in the world who has been a dear, dear friend for more than 3 decades now, Lynn Twist. Lynn wrote, some of you may know, a book called Soul of Money, which was a phenomenal book. And if you haven't read it, it's worth your time no matter what. And I'm going to read it because it's a long quote, but it sets the stage for what's coming next. Because in looking at the definition of prosper economically, because we're just on the first part of this. Remember, we're going to go do prosper economically, prosper socially, prosper spiritually. If you think of it from prosper economically, here's what Lynn wrote. Money does not define your worth. It is merely a tool to express and expand your values. When we see money as a source of love and connection, it transforms from a scarce resource to an infinite flow. The value of money extends far beyond what it can buy. It represents the choices we make and the impact we have on the world. Money is a form of energy exchange. When we hoard it, we stagnate the flow, but when we give it freely, we invite abundance into our lives. When we align our financial choices with our deepest values, we create a life that is in harmony with our soul's purpose. Money is a resource, not a goal. It is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Financial wealth without inner wealth is ultimately empty. True riches comes from cultivating a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Our relationship with money is a reflection of our relationship with ourselves. Healing one can heal the other. That's 360-degree consciousness on the issue of financial well-being and prospering. So if you think of, and it never ceases to astound me that a path I took in life without even knowing I was going there, which happened to take me in business because I was really upset and mad at business, ended up paying me well, because that was never an issue. To me, it was like, what's the mission? How do I get the mission done? And it'll pay what it pays. And I started this thing, which Jim referred to in the introduction, the World Business Academy. So in 1986, when we started the Academy, which is a very vibrant and growing organization to this day, we had a 3-part mission statement. And it hasn't changed since 1986. And I want you to listen for the word consciousness in the mission statement. So here it is. The purpose of the World Business Academy is to shift the consciousness of existing business leadership from that of a predator to that of a steward, because you act differently if you think you're responsible. The second part is to shift the consciousness of young people going into business so they see themselves entering a noble profession rather than the jungle. Because you give yourself permission to do things in the jungle you will not do in the temple. The third part is to shift the consciousness of the public at large so it changes and shifts and puts its money where its deeper values, not its superficial values, where its deeper values are. That's the goal and the mission of the World Business Academy. And when I started out in 1986 as a younger man on that mission, I had no idea where it would go, but I can tell you today, as I stand here, I'm astounded where it's gone. So we've, as Jim mentioned, we've launched, I can't tell you how many nonprofits and spun them off, and they're on their own, doing well. But the one I'm most proud of on that part of the mission statement is a thing called Just Capital, which I was the founder of 11 years ago, and which is very active now. And if you tune on CNBC, which is turn on that, it's considered the #1 business channel in the country. And we do at least 3 shows a month on CNBC. For the first 4 or 5 years, our partner was Forbes magazine. And I picked Forbes because Forbes was the most, and probably still is, the most conservative business publication in America. And I wanted conservative people to embrace this ideology because my belief was, which has now been proven by the marketplace, that if you were smart enough to know that making share owners rich wasn't your purpose, you're smart enough to make more money for your share owners. So there was a man named Milton Friedman in 1972, Ronald Reagan's favorite economist, who said the only legitimate purpose for business was to make money for its share owners. Everything else was inappropriate. And he's social conscious, anything that would allow for the environment or employees, not valid. That really ticked me off. And so I started writing articles back in 1972 about that. And I came up with a thing called a different approach, a very different, called the stakeholder model. So in the stakeholder model, what we say is, if you take care of all of your stakeholders, you take care of your customers, first of all, your employees, first and foremost. Take care of your customers. You take care of your vendors. You take care of your community, and most importantly, you take care of the biosphere. You will actually end up making more money for your shareowners. And at the time, in 1972, that was a radical belief in the business community. I can tell you right now, 680 of the 1,000 largest companies, public companies in America, now subscribe to that philosophy. They're on our website every day. We spend about $12 million, $14 million some years in research, giving them information about how they can improve what they do in the marketplace by embracing stakeholder capitalism. It has been overwhelmingly successful. We're no longer looked at as some kind of a weird idea. We're now looked at as a way to make money. And this all came about because of Deepak, who said to me one day, Rinaldo, how do we keep business from getting so crazy and ruining the place? And I said, well, Deepak, these guys are not going to meditate their way there. That's not going to happen. They're not going to meditate their way to healthy. So we're going to have to change the goalposts. We have to change the way they view success. How do they score success? And the way business scores success is in bottom line. So we came up with this theory, stakeholder capitalism, and we issued a challenge and created what's called an ETF, where we basically said we will outperform the companies that score highest on our test basis, will outperform the Russell 1000. 13 years in a row, we've outperformed the Russell 1000. They've never beat us, and usually by more than 10%, by the way. Because the simple truth is, if you're smart enough to know to take care of all your stakeholders, you're smart enough to know how to make money for your shareowners. And you make money longer, and you make money better. And the place is a better place because you were there, and that's the response to the first consciousness challenge of the World Business Academy mission. Stop being predators. You think it serves your interests in the short term, but it doesn't even serve your interest in the medium term. And my God, it's destructive in the long term. We have to change the way business thinks, or we're doomed. And I continually come up against this, particularly in the environmental world. So I share with you that the shift in consciousness in your own economic reality is, if you see yourself as a cog in a wheel that's chasing some way to make more money, the way companies do, you too will fail. You'll fail emotionally. You probably will fail economically, but you certainly, if you do succeed economically, will be a very unhappy person on your deathbed. Ever see anybody on their deathbed say, I wish I could have one more day at the office? I wish I could make another couple $1 million. No, that's not what happens. That's not reality. Reality is, if you chase false gods, you may catch them to your own regret. What you want to do is chase not just necessarily the way the world would score you, but you want to chase true prosperity. Go back to the original definition I gave you. You want to prosper. And that means you want to have the appropriate conditions for your own livelihood, but not to let somebody else set them by artificial goals that were created by a theoretical belief that more was better, more money is better than less money, more of anything's better than less of anything. That thinking has got us to the edge of termination. Human civilization is probably very close to being upset, not to the point where everybody on the planet will die, but it's going to be billions. And it's not that far away. It's closer than you think. And I don't want to get into that because I also publish the Optimist Daily. I'd like you all to take it. It's a free thing. It's a free service. I do that to keep myself sane. I strongly urge you read it too. It's totally free. And every day we come up with 2 stories on something optimistic that's happening somewhere on the planet, and that's the way I keep a balance to this whole thing. But apart from the Optimist Daily, what I've discovered is the people who are happiest are the people who accept economic return as a subset of a lifestyle choice, not the goalpost towards which life is directed. That's what 360-degree consciousness tells us. We see that which is not in the focal plane we came to with our blinders at the outset. It gives us the full perspective of what our life here for the short time it exists is capable of. So that's benefit number one. I want to talk about benefit number two, prosper socially. How does one prosper socially? Well, social wealth, basically is a dictionary definition, refers to our relationships with others, the networks we are a part of. It's about people we know. It's really defined as the measure of our ability to build meaningful and maintain meaningful connection. Right? That's social wealth. Think about it. Nothing in there has a dollar sign. It has connections. It has networking. It has humanity. Who are the countries that are most famous for achieving social prosperity? Well, start with Bhutan, right? Right? The happiness index. Who'd have thought of such a thing in a little hilltop country in the middle of nowhere in the top of the Himalayas? The idea that you would create an index to measure a country's success by how happy its people were was a revolutionary breakthrough, which still exists to this day. But there's another thing that happens every year. Every year, there's an international survey of the happiest places on earth. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it actually exists. And every year, 6 of the top 10 countries are always the Nordic countries. Always. Denmark, Sweden. They're always up there in the top. And we laugh at them sometimes in this country because we think of, well, it's socialism. Okay, well, it's a form of socialism. It's a social humanity. We have socialism in the United States. It's called the military-industrial complex. So if you're Northrop Grumman, or you're Boeing, or you're any one of the other military contractors, you literally are an arm of the U.S. government. That's socialism. You are not responsible for profits to anybody, and you can reap as many profits as you want as long as you play that game. It's absolutely morally bankrupt. And guess what? We placed 28th in the happiness index this year. 28th! Sweden, Norway, Denmark, numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now, why is that? Because if you want to socially prosper, it's about your connections. So when you take away from people the fear that they won't be able to pay their medical bills, when you take away the fear that they won't end up on the street homeless as we have in this country, I mean, we have the homeless in this country, they don't there. When you take away the fear that somehow you will end up destitute at the end of your life, so you better make even more money, work longer, work harder, store up more, until one day everything you stored up doesn't matter because you're gone anyhow. The guy with the biggest storehouse of money was King Tut. He's dead. He didn't take any of it with him, right? All those treasures, he didn't get to take it with him. So when you think of prospering socially, think of Bhutan, think of the Nordic countries, and think of the fact that what you're creating in the individual connections you have with humans and the networks you build, that's social prosperity. You know, if you're looking for what may be in front of you, which would, I'd say, be the traditional American view of how we process information, you will never see anything but 180 degrees, at best. Most people see less than that. If you look at the social contract as a 360-degree relationship, you understand that there, but for the grace of God go I, meaning there, the fellow human, is representative of what you would like, or as the golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you co-create a society based on the golden rule, it looks more like what's at the top of the happiness index. And if you create a society which believes that social advantage means I can go to better parties with more glitterati than you can, you end up 28th on the index. It's that simple. You want to be socially prosperous, or do you want to be down at number 28? And the only way you're going to get to the top is by taking care that each person in your world is actually enjoying what you would like to have for yourself, because you see the commonness of the humanity. It's, what do you need to know if you want to be the good guy, good woman at work, or the good guy at home? What you have to know is it doesn't matter what you made. It doesn't matter how people talked about you publicly. What matters is who cares and why. And if the answer is nobody cares. Probably it's true that you weren't working on networking or your social connections. And therefore, you've lived an isolated life, which is tragic, because it turns out you only get one of them. And if you burn it on that social scale of what the Joneses did, and you're going to catch up with them, which has been a dominant theme in American culture for a very long time, you're going to be very unhappy. And that's the opposite of 360-degree consciousness. So the nature of consciousness requires that we develop this third-party observer, right? This ability to see yourself sitting in that front row center seat and watching that character on the stage with your name that looks like you, and seeing what's behind them, what's on either side of them, what's in front of them. And that front row center seat gives you the ability to start making choices that you didn't think you could. If you really step back and you look at yourself as just one character, an unbelievable diorama, an unbelievable play, a magical play, the play of life. And you say, wow, I had no idea that if this character had gone this way and said that, then this whole other thing wouldn't have happened. You know, you've heard this story with the butterfly wings flapping, there's a hurricane in Puerto Rico. You know, it's like you want to give yourself permission to see what all of these forces around you are. And when you do, with humility and with a consciousness that you want to prosper socially, you will find out that you ended up with social prosperity, not just financial prosperity. Now the third and final leg. Prospering spiritually. I had the good fortune to become totally disgusted with the Catholic Church when I was 19. Now, I'm 100% Italian, which means I was raised completely as a Catholic all those years. And I became very, very upset by what I perceived to be the church's role in Latin America particularly, where you weren't allowed to use contraception, you couldn't have an abortion, and the entire system locked in a permanent class of peasantry, not unlike the Middle Ages. And the church was behind it all. That was what kept it locked in. These were, 90% plus Catholic countries. And so, it doesn't look right to me. I don't think I want to be part of this system. I want to do something else. I don't know what, and so I went on a quest. And fortunately, my inquiry led me to world religions. And as I got into world religions, I started seeing more and more of what we had in common, no matter what door we came through in the church or synagogue or mosque. And when I started looking at world religions that way, I started picking up books like Aldous Huxley's book on perennial wisdom. What is it out there that's common to all of these spiritual traditions? So although I don't think there's necessarily a good or bad spiritual tradition, I think it's totally unique to the individual. I've got my own preferences. Other people have theirs. That's okay. In fact, I'll quote Deepak. My good friend Deepak used to say, if you think of yourself and you're on the edge of a lake, everybody gets in a canoe. And we paddle our canoes to the middle of the island in the middle of the lake. And we get out, and we all hold hands. And we're just one. And then you look and you go, oh, he came in the canoe called Hebrew. He came in the canoe called Christian. He came in the canoe called Muslim. All of a sudden you realize the canoe you came in doesn't matter. You got to the island. So spiritual prosperity is getting to the island. It's getting to the place in the middle of the lake where we are consciously aware that we are one. And I'll tell you, the best example of that is that one of my dear, dear friends, until she passed away not too long ago, he used to live here, Barbara Marks Hubbard. So we were friends for 4 decades, more than friends. She used to call me brother, and I used to call her, we had this thing where she was Star Child. I was Brother Rinaldo. We had a friend named Hazel. We used to call her Earth Child. Anyway, Barbara Marks and I used to have this debate, which my lovely wife here in the center row remembers, going on for years. And the debate was, we've gone through 33 levels of human evolution. Interesting. Think about that. So this is not new. We're doing another one now. And who thought that 33 was the end of the line? Maybe 34 won't be the end of the line. And so Barbara and I set out to name what this next evolutionary dynamic would be called. I'm going to define it, and I'm going to tell you what she decided to call it. And because she was my bigger sister, She got to name it. So she got to win. So all of us in this room, with maybe one exception, were born as Homo sapiens. Sapiens. So Homo sapiens, none of us are, was Coco the gorilla in Palo Alto. So Coco the gorilla had 13 keys on a keyboard. She could type. She could tell you who her chimp was. She could tell you exactly what was troubling her. I have a tummy ache, or whatever. She could sign. But that particular level of awareness, that consciousness, is what Homo sapiens, which means the man or woman who knows, is capable of, right? That ended 45, 50,000 years ago. It doesn't exist anymore for humans. We became what's called Homo sapiens sapiens, which is the man or woman who knows that they know. So that's reflective consciousness. Coco couldn't do that. Coco could not reflect on her own awareness. She wasn't 360 degrees conscious. So Homo sapiens sapiens, the man or woman who knows that they know, was what almost everybody in this room was born into. The new level of evolution, which has just sprouted in the last few decades, I used to call Homo noeticus. She liked to call it Homo universalis. She won, so we now call it Homo universalis. It's the man or woman who knows that they know, okay, reflective consciousness, and what they know is that we are one. That's universal consciousness. Okay? That's the consciousness of awareness of the oneness of not just human consciousness, but of the universe itself. And that's what we are now understanding. Quantum physics is helping us to prove is the reality we live in. So that spiritual prosperity occurs, it arises out of an awareness that we're not just animatrons. We're not just walking ambulatory amoeba factories. We're not just a bag of microbes. There's something else going on, and that something else is that we can be aware of our awareness, and that the awareness is that we are one and no one else should tell us otherwise. And however that plays itself out in a day-to-day course, when we really embrace that, when we live from that place, we can never be spiritually devoid. And no matter what our tradition is, or no tradition at all, we'll always find our way to the place which can't be ever left, if you realize it, because it is the place that we call home. It's the consciousness within. And that consciousness within is united with all the other consciousness within, and I would argue with the consciousness of the universe itself. I'm almost certain that if we live long enough, we'll find that science will prove there is a universal consciousness, or as Rupert Sheldrake used to say, a field of resonance that travels through all of us and unites us. There's a project which my dear friend Deb Rosman has been working on for 10 years, if you know heart math. They believe that they've been doing this now for 10 years, they've been doing the research, that they're going to be able to prove that the ability of many of us to consciously choose heart resonance at the same moment in time in large enough numbers would in fact shift us to that final evolutionary state. And there's a project about to happen. Joe Dispenza is part of it. HeartMath is fronting it. And there's sensors around the world where they actually are testing this against random number generators to see what the effect of combined consciousness is. It's stunning, and the data is overwhelming. They just released a new program 4 days ago, and they're going to be doing it globally soon. I share that with you because the science is finally connecting with what we actually intuitively would have thought was true in the first place. So I'll end with this. So how did this happen tonight? So here's an interesting story. Jim came up to me and he said, we had a speaker drop out at the last minute, and you were the first speaker in the series, so could you throw something new on the table tonight? Or Wednesday, I guess we had 9 days notice or something like that. And I said, sure. He said, what would you call the talk? I didn't stop, I didn't think about it. I said, 360 degrees of consciousness. Didn't know why I said it. Had no idea why I said it. Just, that's what came through. And I thought that was done.
About 1 minute to figure that out. It was wonderful to see. He just turned off to the side, reflected a few moments, and came back.
It was a God shot. So I thought I was done. And then a day later, I get this call. Well, you got to give us more than that. What are we going to put in the flyer? And I said, well, I never thought of that. He didn't tell me that part. So I said what appeared as the flyer, just to refresh your recollection, because I want you to feel like you got your money's worth. Conscious awareness has to be applied a full 360-degree spectrum of one's life. It can't be boxed off for certain parts of the day or days of the week. The nature of consciousness requires developing the aspect of third-party observer. Come here examples for how to prosper economically, socially, and spiritually from the active application of the third-party observer to your life. Okay. Do you know when I wrote this talk? Anyone want to guess? An hour ago. I had no idea what that meant. Now, where'd it come from? It came from consciousness. It didn't come from me. That's the key. It came through me. So I'll end with one last story. If anything I ever did, and I've been fortunate to have done some things that people would have thought were miraculous, and I know better, and I was standing in a tall skyscraper, okay? Really tall skyscraper, 20, 30 stories in the air, and the sun's setting. And so I hold out my arms in the window like this. I look like the risen Christ, right? And you see light streaming around me. It's like, oh my God, this guy is something amazing. It's JC, come back. And the truth is, I'm blocking the light. I'm not the light. My job is to get out of the way so the light can come through. That's called, me in that case, is ego. Letting the light come through is consciousness. So 360 degrees of consciousness means not getting stuck on the person you think you are in front of the window, no matter how good it looks to the observer. It's being the truth of the light on both sides of the window. That's the whole story. Thank you. Questions?
Remarkable. Thank you very much. This is outstanding. My goodness. I knew you were a motivator. You connect with the source of fiery energy, and that's what we need. He's here to take some questions, and so think about what you'd like to know. And any questions come up? If not, I've got some.
Go.
I told him before we started, I had several questions. He said, well, you might give me a few hints here or something. Just general questions. Tell us a good way to start the day.
Oh, that's easy. If you don't have young children like I do, meditation. If you do, get them off to school and then meditate. It's true. I mean, I've had the good fortune of giving good to see you, Dick. I've had the good fortune to do a lot of guest lecturing at top business schools around the world, like Stanford and Kellogg, et cetera. And whenever I go, they usually invite me because they think I'm a business guy. And I always start off by, they ask me, usually, like, what's the number one thing you should do if you want to succeed in business? I go meditate. Look, I've been saying that for like 40 years. Finally, it's getting through. And now I don't have to say it anymore. When they book me, they know that I'm going to say that. So the first thing you want to do when you wake up, if you don't have children, take a moment. And then I would also say this. I do this thing called meditation on the run. Even if you take only a couple of minutes during the day, when you're really in the midst of the whole miasma of life, and just pause, and just give yourself a second or two, a minute or two to go inside. It's amazing how you can connect with who you are, really, somewhere interior. And that's where...
Do you ask yourself a question? How do you do that? What, do you aspire to something else? Do you recall a prior meditation that you were at your peak of? Do you think about some way of making the day better? Or do you just quiet everything down and expect something to help you become aware of what to do next?
I think that for me, it's don't expect. Expectations set up false targets. So for me, I sometimes call it monkey mind, and my mind's always going. my dear wife says to me sometimes in the middle of the night, "Stop thinking, I'm trying to sleep." Literally, true, honey? Yeah. So we have this impact on people even when we don't want to. But no, I think it's really important to let go. For me, not for everybody, my form of meditation is just stop. Just try to let go of it. No expectations, no outcomes, no anything. And what often happens unintentionally is in that quiet inner space, stuff happens, good stuff. And then I go, oh, so I have this little pad by my bed and a little flashlight. And every time, like in the middle of the night, I think of something, I write it down so that I don't forget it, and I go back to sleep. And sometimes I wake up with 2 or 3 pages of stuff, and I guess, okay, now I can work on it tomorrow. That's like meditation. In fact, I recommend if you're going to meditate and something comes to you, don't get distracted, write it down and let it go. It'll be there. So really letting go of expectations is probably the biggest part for me of meditation. Now, other people do other things, mantras are great, right? There's all kinds of techniques. I'm not going to predict one, but for me, it's just get quiet.
An inspiring phrase to me, a practical view of the whole thing, though, is also reasonable expectations. Coming back to peasant wisdom, what's possible?
I was just going to add the phrase that we say as part of our prayer, God is the source.
Yeah.
And you were asking, is there one phrase that we use during the day? That would be it.
Yeah.
God is the source.
Yeah. And it's funny, the word God, some people get caught up in that one, so don't. That happens to be my phraseology and hers, but, it's just the Buddhist. It's the wind that blows to the world. It's just what is. It's the universe. It's consciousness. And so the words shouldn't get in the way. They should just be a way to communicate. Yeah.
Great to see you again, Rinaldo. Just kind of echoing back to our mutual friend, Earthchild Hazel Henderson, and the Ethical Marketplace television series. And, bringing the stakeholder model in, do you think we were too early? How do you think we get the message across? ESG is growing, but it's also being under attack.
Yeah.
How do we start to shift that first level of consciousness so that we can create a runway toward the higher levels?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know Hazel, go look her up. She was an amazing human being, unbelievable contributor to human society. And she passed away last year. There's a video they put together of some of her close friends like me and others, where we basically just gave our reflections on what it was to know Hazel. Hazel was way ahead of her time. You're right about that. And I think what she did is the answer to your question. Live the truth you know, and don't get caught up in whether other people can get to that level of truth yet or not. Keep putting it out, and be willing to accept that people aren't coming along as fast as you are. Hazel was the author of a thing called the love economy. She actually was the first one to calculate that we gauge economics wrong in society today. That we tend to look at the things that love produces and put no value on it. Teachers, as opposed to prison guards. Mothers in place of workers. Fathers who take care of their children in place of laborers. So the idea of the love economy, she said, was, why aren't we measuring what we do for each other, social networking, social purpose, why don't we measure that, like Bhutan? This was way before Bhutan ever did the index. And then people will see that we put our money in the wrong place. And we start to put our money in different places. Because money is just a form of exchange, as I said earlier tonight, which Hazel would agree with. So I think that the answer is you got to just live the truth you know. And yes, you're going to be ahead of, that's just the nature of getting there a little before other people, but it's not a discouragement in the sense that if you got there first, hopefully others will come along, and if you're lucky, you live long enough to see it. If you're not, you still did it. But you can't take on anything that isn't yours to take on. So I got my life, and I got to pay a price for what I do, and that's what I pay. And frankly, sometimes it can be a pretty steep price. But it's just part of what came with the life I do. No one's supposed to copy that. For some people, you take someone like Teilhard de Chardin, who was ostracized by his own Catholic religion back in the 30s, silenced by the Pope. Simple French Jesuit worker priest. Wasn't looking for anything and created a world-changing philosophy. You can look at so many examples of people who created their belief system, put it out in the world, and weren't attached, that's the key word, attached to whether the world accepted it or not. One could say that's part of the success of Christ, is if he had been attached, I'm not sure it would have worked as well. Because think about it, of all the people who tried to live a good message, and so much chaos and hostility and death and destruction has been executed in his name, you would think by now we'd all think he was a bad guy. And yet, we all understand there was something there in essence that survived all those years of Catholic Church abuse and then some, Crusades and everything else, the Inquisition. So I think even as humble a message as it is, that Christ himself could not play to the audience of who would accept him at that time. Hey, who are we but less than that? So we just got to do our thing and hope it works.
I want to say thank you very much, but I'm quite intrigued by the third-party observer, and I would like to hear you expound upon that a bit more. Why do you think we would have that third-party observer in the front row of a Broadway play? Is that the only analogy you have? Do you have more? And how might we learn to see in the 360?
Yeah, okay. So one of the nice things about third-party observer is, by definition, it's a 360 observation. Okay? So you could say that all the paintings of the Middle Ages that were really inspirational, where you see people from a higher elevation, right? Particularly some of the painters that really specialized in light effects, right? Like some of the ones in Venice. I would say that every person that's ever looked at the Sistine Chapel, if they gave themselves a chance, went to third-party observer. They saw the God looking down image, even though it was an anthropomorphic image. I think the other examples of third-party observer are when you develop the discipline well enough, you start to do it almost automatically. You walk in a room and you see yourself walking in the room. Like I'm seeing myself talk right now. And I've gotten used to doing it. And the more I do it, like any discipline, the more easily it comes. So I would say start by consciously trying to observe yourself the way other people see you. And when you do that, don't make any judgments. You will eventually, but that comes in time. I make a lot of judgments. I wish I was different. I wish I could improve this. I wish I could improve that. I wish I hadn't done this. I wish I hadn't done that. And that's okay. I'm learning. I'm still learning. But if I keep the perspective that I'm trying to watch myself interacting with others in my activities, it brings me back, even when I forget. And I do forget a lot. I forget a lot. And so I'm not great at this, but I know I am better at it because I practice it. So it's not so much about examples, it's so much about practice, like any discipline. Yes, Fred. We can talk about it. Microgrids?
Rinaldo, we've known each other for about 7 years now, and one of the things that has always impressed me with you is your comprehensive knowledge on so many topics. So I don't know if it's a 360 view, but it's a 360 knowledge base that you definitely bring to every conversation. My question is, kind of bridging the last question with a 360 perspective and how that works, and then also your meditation that you do every day. What do you think about during that meditation time? Does it tie into the 360 perspective, or does it just calm you to be able to go attack the day very efficiently? Or like, what are you doing? How do you meditate, and what are you thinking about during that time?
It's the reverse. It's the opposite of 360. It's nothingness. For me, the best discipline is just let go, let go, let go. And I'm not that good at it yet. I've been practicing it for 50 years, and I'm still not good at it. But I'm getting better. And because the two of us have been a couple for 45 years, we usually start with a series of invocations or prayers where we try to set up what it is we're about that day. And I find the best part for me is the space in between. So we've got the support, God is the source, and we have other things that we say. And we brought our children up to know what those are. And the space in between them is the part that's the most magical. So what I regret, in the sense of if I could choose, and I guess I could, but I haven't, I've made other choices, it would be to be less busy and have more of those spaces in between. There's an old Hindu thing that they say that the first third of your life, you're your father's son, man. The second third of your life, you're your wife's husband. And the third third of your life, you're preparing to meet God. So it's that letting go, so whatever your definition of God, whatever your definition of consciousness is, let go of everything else so that can come in, and that's an empty space. And that space is unbelievably full because it's so empty. So it's the opposite of 360. It's letting go of the 360. The 360 is a technique for when we're walking around being intentional. The void is what you go to when you don't want to be intentional. Anybody else? Robert. Oh, I'm going to get my score now.
Come on, it's not about scores. I'll stand up here. So, I met this guy in 1982. I was a freelance writer in Los Angeles, living in Sherman Oaks, and I talked to a woman named Marilyn Ferguson. You haven't mentioned her tonight. Anybody know that name? Okay, yeah, absolutely. The Aquarian Conspiracy sold tens of thousands of copies, and it was very much about human consciousness.
Totally.
About our topic tonight. And I said to Marilyn, who in the business world would you suggest that I interview to talk about the consciousness of business? And so she says, well, Rinaldo Brutoco, Hillsborough, California. So I flew up on PSA and interviewed Rinaldo, and we've been friends ever since. And I want to just kind of reflect on how consciousness is in the news at the present time, because it's sort of, I think about you a lot in reference to consciousness, and in reference in particular to this talk of the singularity. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. It's the notion that machines will become as smart as, or even smarter than humans. And so my question, Rinaldo, would be, are you thinking much about the singularity in terms of human consciousness, and where do you see the future of human consciousness given that AI and all of these technologies, deep fakes and all of the misinformation and all that comes with that package, what is the impact going to be? And one little side note here, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Jonathan Haidt material. The book is on teen anxiety. I don't have the right title on that, but we're all...
Don't give your kid a cell phone is the subtitle.
Yeah, right. Between 2011 and 2015, kids, Gen Z, got smartphones. And the rates of anxiety and all of these things against human consciousness began to outbreak. So looking ahead, you're a futurist. So where is this going? You're an optimist, but you're a futurist. You're seeing the assault on the kinds of wonderful consciousness that we have enjoyed and shared and been nourished by from your message tonight. So where do you see this going, though, in the wider world?
So I touched on that a little bit when I talked about the fact that there's a lot of fear about AI. In fact, I just got a patent, I'm very proud of it, in January, for what I'm told is the most advanced patent in the world of robotics, which I patented a technology for manufacturing using generative AI 6 years ago, when nobody even was talking about generative AI. It's a long story. So I'm very, very up to speed on generative artificial intelligence. In fact, my background in artificial intelligence goes back to 1986. So I've been involved in the world of AI that long. And what I said earlier tonight, and I'm going to amplify it in response to your question, I said that the thing that's unique about us as humans, which machines cannot replicate, is consciousness. And so let me use that as a part and amplify from that. And I said specifically, computers have for decades been able to accumulate information faster, sort it, regurgitate it, and distribute it beyond anything a human mind can do. And now we have a single chip that just came out from NVIDIA, which is 30,000 times faster than the fastest chip ever made before it. 30,000 times. And uses almost no electricity. So the question that came up at the recent conference that NVIDIA was in, and NVIDIA, by the way, is the third company in the world to pass the $2 trillion mark in market capital. The first two were Apple and, of course, Google. And the third one's NVIDIA, because they make the chips that make artificial intelligence possible. Now, what the Hindu seers would say is that this period of time we are going through is called Kali Yuga. It's the period of destruction and rebirth. And when I've asked some of my friends who are Hindu seers, what do you think? Where is this going to end up? Where does it go? Same question you're asking. They said, we don't know. That's the nature of Kali Yuga. But we're clearly going through the destruction phase now. When does the destruction phase? No one knows when it ends. And no one knows how it will end up ending and be reborn. But what the seers believe is that this is just another turn of the wheel. So will that mean the destruction of the systems we built up until now so that something will be completely renewed? Possible. I mean, as some of you know, that one of the things that people believe in forest fire management is if you don't let forest fires happen periodically, you can't regenerate. I don't like to believe that about humans, because the destruction and the pain and the misery that comes with that is unbelievable. But it seems to me that it's reasonable to expect that if the machines get to the point where they actually do replace us, meaning they take over, that will itself be self-destructive behavior we created, reflected in our machines. So our consciousness, inadvertently, will have sown the seeds of our own destruction. And when that happens, eventually the machines will run out of oil. Okay? They'll run out of lubrication. They'll run out of whatever it is that they need from us that they can't do for themselves. And some people say, well, they can do anything for themselves. And I don't think that's true, because they cannot tap consciousness. So what does that mean? Could a machine ever love? Could a machine ever feel experiential connection with other? No, there's no way to program for that. Could a machine ever look at the impossibility of calculations of what it means to be the unique beings that we are? I don't believe it can. I believe that's what makes us uniquely human. So I don't prize us because we can remember as much as computers, because we can't, that we can assimilate data as fast as we can't, that we can distribute as fast as no. Can we do as much as they do? No. I also don't fear that there won't be any jobs for us, because I remember that was exactly the complaint that was made before the Industrial Revolution. What will happen? There'll be nobody working because the machines will take over. Now, this is a different level of threat, clearly, when you're talking about consciousness and intelligence, and I wanted to separate the two. Some of the most intelligent people you've ever read about were really unconscious, really unconscious. And look at the destruction they cause. In our own lifetime, you look at somebody like Elon Musk, and I don't want to pick on Elon, but basically, unbelievably bright and unbelievably dangerous. And I think the whole world has come to see that. So is Elon closer to a machine or a human? I think his desire to emulate machines has infected his ability to be human. You know, anybody that intentionally has 10 children by 6 different women, 2 of whom were born on the same day by 2 different women, and believes that he's doing seeding the future generation so he can go to Mars and survive what he's going to create the destruction here on planet Earth, something about that thought is broken, right? Something is wrong there. And if that's the intelligence at its apex of the richest man in the world, or second richest at this point, then one would question whether machines would ever do better than Elon. What has Elon lost? It would appear he lost social connection. it would appear he has lost the ability to understand what prosperity means, because no amount of wealth will change it. It would appear that he's lost what it means to feel the kinds of relationships we get to enjoy every day for nothing, and he can't buy with all the money in the world. So my expectation, not a prediction, my expectation is the machines are part of the problem we have. We are going through Kali Yuga. I don't know when it's going to end. I don't know how many billions of people are going to die in the process and how ugly it's going to get, but climate change is certainly going to make it a real mess. At the other side of that, I trust consciousness, because whoever survives that vortex, you know what a vortex is, right? It's when you, or Venturi, it's a better example. When you go through a Venturi, it sucks any gas, like an air, and it tightens it into a cone, and all of a sudden it expands outward, and it just explodes outward, and it starts to expand. That's a Venturi principle, okay? That's what we're going through. It's a Venturi. And there's no telling where that ends, no telling how much destruction happens in the process. But what I do believe is that when you put consciousness on one side of the Venturi, it will come out on the other, and everything else will get lost in between, no matter how destructive. So I don't know what's going to end. And I don't know, I mean, fortunately, I'm as old as I am. I might not see the end of it. But I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the Hindus would say that's what Kali Yuga always does. So we're in it. We're done?
Are you ready for one last question?
Whatever.
Or are you full of energy, or are you ready to be done?
This is what gives me energy. Go ahead.
I'm curious how to handle the difficult situations that are going on now. You started your talk by saying how horrible certain things are happening, and obviously there's many events taking place. How do you suggest we process that? I have tried to put ideas together in terms of how to have a healthy worldview. Our next speaker is Rabbi Cohen. He's going to address that topic. And I think we need to do this because we're impacted by it. If we think of only the worst things happening and the suffering and the motivation of people doing horrible things, somehow we have to rise above that or limit our input. Often I'm suggesting to my patients, back off on how much you're exposing yourself to this. To listen to the same terrible things over and over will erode your own sense of who you are. What is a simple suggestion you have for how to process this? And my own sense is we need to have a strong relationship with our own soul, our own mission, and why we're here, and the positive elements that it has to offer. What would you suggest?
I think that's right. I think there's more to it. I think that, what is that prayer? Dear God, give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that's part of what you're asking.
Yes.
Okay? And I think that takes a level of humility most people don't want to own. So if you're really humble about it and you go, okay, what is it I cannot change? What is it I can change? And if I'm willing to try to do so, even if that takes everything in me. And what's the wisdom to know the difference? I can't change that there are 35,000, 34,000 dead Palestinians, most of them women and children, who are getting bombed every night in an unbelievable conflagration that seems to be without end. It tears me apart to see that. But I don't know what I can do to change it. So that goes in category one, you know. I can write letters to my congressman. I can care about the issue. But I can't own the outcome. Okay? I could own the outcome in something in my community if I don't do something about the homeless situation. It's on a scale I can deal with. I can own the outcome if I don't care enough to get out of my sofa. They call this the sofa election. Will the next president be elected by who won, you know, who got off the sofa, basically, who actually decided to go vote? I think that as to the amount of information that people put in repetitively, I used to, for a number of years, I was the CEO of an advanced computer company, and we had this phrase back then, which you probably all heard, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So if you're putting garbage in your mind every day, stop. And certainly don't repeat it over and over again. And what happens, there's an addiction, Jim. There's an addiction towards having what you think is going on be reinforced by the next message you get. And if that addiction is based on a negative view of where we are going, it will feed on itself. So I agree with the suggestion, don't let any more of that in. So it's one thing to let in information. I think information is wonderful. Gather as much as you can on every subject you can. But you don't want to be a victim of having to look for hearing the same thing over and over again. That is actually a form of insanity. And what it does is it makes us crazier. I think it's safe to say, as to outcomes, we're on the verge of a civil war here, if we're not already in it. We're close to a Fort Sumter moment. I don't know where it's going to go. And it could be very ugly, and it could come out okay. I can hope for the best. I can put my consciousness behind what's best. But every story that comes at me that tells me we're going to have a civil war, I've already heard that thought. I don't need to hear it again and again and again. All I need to know is, okay, it's a possibility. But what else is possible? You know, what's possible is some beautiful event can occur. And I want to have room for that to happen. And something can come up which is endearing, that I want to have room for that to happen. And if all I'm going to do is keep cycling back something that I already know is, it's not information anymore, it's addiction. And I think we have an information addiction rather than an information curiosity in this country. And so I would urge people to watch that addiction like they do the addictions that we're familiar with. And so I'd say to himself, you know, are you listening to feed your addiction, or are you getting new information? And as my wife knows, I can't hear the same thing twice. It bugs me. I go, wait a minute, I heard that already. I don't want that anymore. I mean, okay, I got that point of view. Give me another one. Give me something fresh. Because there's so much to know. Who wants to get stuck like a needle, keeps going over and over again on the same track? Remember we were kids? Remember needles, records? Some of you remember needles and records. Anyway, so I don't like to feed the addiction. I want to feed awareness. I want to feed curiosity. I want to feed new information. And even when I think there's something terrible coming, I want to feed, what can I do about it? How can I change that negative outcome, if possible?
Outstanding. Let us thank this man for sharing his wisdom.
Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.